I'm going to be taking it solo for today. Hopefully John will be back soon. If not, we'll see if we can find some fighters to come in the interim. So we got a lot to cover today. Obviously, I was hoping to have Donovan Freelo in from Team Vandalay, but he was unable to make it. So we'll have to try to get him in before his fight comes up, or maybe we'll be able to grab him after his fight so he can talk about his experience at King of the Cage. So what we're going to be talking about today. Okami signed with the WSOF, which is owned by Ray Sefo, who trains out here with the Extreme Couture team. We had the results of the Glory 11 in Chicago, which was a kickboxing Muay Thai event, which had a lot of great names on it. And if you missed that, hopefully you can find it on your DVR or TiVo or whatever it is you guys got. I don't own a TV, so who needs that? We have Fallon Fox, who lost her fight against Evan Smith at CFA, which was moderately big news, considering Fallon Fox made a lot of waves with her being a transgender. And then we have UFC 166 breakdown, which apparently I'll be breaking down myself. I can try to argue with myself. I think that'll sound a little weird, but I'll do my best to be fair to all parties involved. So the first thing we should start with is that Okami getting signed by the WSOF, World Series of Fighting. Whether or not it's a good move, I'm not sure for World Series of Fighting. Obviously, it's a big pickup. It's a good name. It's a name people know. It's a name people can recognize. That's always important to have when you are working with a pretty limited number of fighters, which the WSOF is certainly doing right now. They're trying to build their name as best they can. They got Berkman and Fitch, who fought recently. They have Sefo on there, which is great to have, and now they have Okami. But how to build him up in the organization is going to be a little tough. You have fighters in the middleweight division like David Branch, Jesse Taylor, Danielo Villafort, Dustin Jacoby, Paulo Filo, who, he's been struggling a lot lately, but he's got an impressive record. He's someone who can definitely give your guy fights if he's all there. Problem is sometimes he isn't. Jesse Taylor's also in the league, but that's pretty much what you got as far as talent that can take on Okami at the middleweight division. Do you just throw him in right away against the top guys immediately? Do you give him a feeder fight? I mean, he's 6-3 in his last 9 UFC fights. That is not bad. And it was a surprise to a lot of people that he was removed from the UFC. Might have been he was asking for a little too much money, but who knows? There's a lot that can go on behind the scenes there. But he's got a pretty small pool of talent to deal with, at least in the interim. Maybe WSOF is going to go out and find even more talent to bolster it up, but you got to wonder what he's going to be able to do at middleweight. There is the chance he can move up to light heavyweight at the 205-pound division. You got guys like Anthony Johnson, Tyrone Spong, who are able to fight there, but guess what? There's only 6 guys in that division. Not a whole lot to work with, even less than at the middleweight division. Again, maybe they're going to bring in some more names. Okami is a good pickup, but if you can't do anything with the name, if you can't give him good challenges, what exactly are you going to do with him? I assume you're going to be paying him some pretty good money. So you're going to have to find somebody that can at least give him a quality run. That's not to say Okami's just going to run through some of these guys. Some of those names I listed off are people that know how to throw down, that have good ground game, that are tough as nails. So it's not like Okami is the de facto champion. But you got to wonder, what are they going to do if he's able to just run through some of their better names? In a way, it kind of makes the divisions look bad. So it's a double-edged sword. Either he's going to run through you guys and make them look bad, or he loses and you just spend a lot of money on a guy who isn't able to keep up even with the talent that you have, and it makes the UFC look pretty smart for getting rid of him. So we'll see what happens. Obviously, the UFC lets go of guys pretty often. Maybe the WSOF is just getting ready to pick up all the names that come through. And it's not like there aren't people out there in the world that can come up and make a name for themselves in the WSOF. But Okami him and Fitch are the big names, and it can be a problem if both of them either can't live up to expectations or just make everyone else look amateurish. Anyway, we'll see how that goes. We have Glory 11 results that happened last week. If you didn't catch that, that's some fantastic Muay Thai fighting. Some of the rules are a little wonky, I think, right now. They got the tournament knockdowns rule, which is if you get 2 knockdowns in a single round, that's a TKO. The reason that gets a little weird is exactly what we saw in the first fight versus Rico Verhoeven versus Saki. Saki was the number 2 guy coming into the Glory tournament. They were pretty sure it was going to be him versus Daniel Guita. And Saki was knocked down, seemingly, in the first round by Verhoeven. But it turned out he was just hit in the shoulder and the chest, kind of in the pectoral, and was just knocked off balance. But the ref counted him as down and gave him an 8 count. That pretty much secured the round for Verhoeven because Saki had to play conservative because he was afraid that he might get knocked down again, and that would just be the end of the fight off of a technicality. So he essentially had to give up the first round. Now, yeah, I give it to Verhoeven. He kept up the pace in the second and third round. So it's not like he was able to get away with some cheap move and then just won off of that single technicality. He took it to Saki, and it was a surprising upset, I would say. And maybe there's people out there who know way more than me about kickboxing who could say, well, you should have seen this coming. But honestly, it was a toss-up other than that knockdown, which really slanted it one way in the first round for Verhoeven. But you still got to give it to him. He had another fight that night when he had to take on Guita, who was able to make it through the first round pretty quickly. And then he was unfortunately unable to keep up the pace still against Verhoeven, who put on a masterful display of quality offense and defense. I really mixed it up well. You see some guys who can only throw in that offense or only play cagey defense and throw in 1 or 2 punches per round. But Verhoeven was able to kind of ebb and weigh when it came to throwing some offense, caging up when he needed to, and then coming right back and throwing some more. So he was able to beat out Guita in a decision and is the first Glory Tournament champion, so congratulations to him. I don't think a lot of people saw him being able to make it. One thing I have to point out at the Glory show, I don't know if anyone noticed this, but there was a fighter named Anderson Silva. I think most people knew that. If they knew anything about the Glory was happening, they probably saw the name or saw his face with the name and made a note of that. But one of the refs was also named Chris Weidman, which I found rather interesting. And for anyone who isn't sure what I'm talking about, Chris Weidman is the man who defeated Anderson Silva, both of them being UFC fighters. So it was just funny to see a man named Anderson Silva getting knocked out with a ref named Chris Weidman near him. That's just a random note I saw. I don't know why I noticed that. It's really dorky. I even noticed that. But I watch a lot of fights, so sometimes I notice stuff, and that was just one of those things. Anyway, we'll move on from that. Oh, and by the way, Glory, that's a pretty good show they're putting on. If you guys aren't used to watching kickboxing, or you've always just kind of watched it, but hasn't really been your thing so far, watch those guys fight. It's ridiculous. Some of the leg kicks, liver shots that they take, and the head shots are always big when guys get a big old kick to the noggin or get floored with a big straight right or a lead left hook. Those are always exciting. But some of these leg kicks and body shots these men are taking, and heavyweights at that, it's impressive that they don't just say, you know what, that's ridiculous. I'm not playing this game anymore. Because I think 99% of people in the world would probably just quit after the first leg kick. Certainly after a good liver shot from a guy like Tyrone Spong. Oh, and Tyrone Spong, I almost forgot to mention him. He fought as well, and he mentioned that he is going to focus on boxing, kind of teasing that it might be by the end of the year. But he's kind of becoming, and he said before he wants to be the Bo Jackson of combat sports. He's definitely trying to do it. I don't know if he'll be able to be a top guy in all the sports he wants to be good in. He definitely has some holes in MMA because he lacks the ground game, and sometimes he paces himself a little too much. But you gotta say he's making the right first steps where he's winning in Glory. He did win his WSOF fight, and hey, he's got Okami in there. At the WSOF, so maybe he can prove something by taking on a guy who clearly is going to have an edge on ground game, but someone he can most definitely tag if he is able to implement his game plan. So anyway, I'm glad I remembered to mention him before we move forward. On to some of the local fighters. We've talked about these guys before, but I like to go through them as much as I can because they all need press, and I think it's important that we try to back all these local guys, especially the ones who are on the cusp of going pro. And one guy I'm going to talk about who has been pro for a little while and has been doing a crazy amateur career, more fights than most people do. But we'll start with Daniel Cuison, who is from Syndicate. He's a longtime Syndicate member, and he is fighting at King of the Cage on October 19th. He's fighting at 170 pounds. He's going for one of those professional contracts now. He's ready to move up to pro. And Daniel's he's a busy guy. He works full time. He's got a girlfriend. And I don't know. God bless her for dealing with a guy who has both a full-time job and trains as much as Daniel does. I don't know if he ever even actually sees her, but that's God bless her for trying, because that's got to be tough when a guy's working that hard. And ladies do it too. I don't know how their boyfriends do it, where they're working out, a few hours a day, and then they got work to do all day long. Where do you find the time? I have no idea. But Daniel is he looks good in his training. I watch him train at Syndicate. He's a grinder. He works hard all the time. He works on all aspects of the game, and hopefully that serves him well in his fight. Now, you never know going in the fight, especially at the amateur level. You don't get to do a lot of studying up on your opponents. And that can be difficult because you never know what you're going to run into. I mean, at one point, Vanderlei Silva was a amateur. Igor Vovchanchyn was an amateur. Kevin Randleman was an amateur. All these guys, you don't know when you're going to run into the next Kevin Randleman, and that could be a dangerous situation. But with how hard Daniel's working, I think he'll be able to take on any comer, and hopefully he gets a good contract out of it. We also have, at the same event, we have Donovan Freelo, who I'm shaking my fist that he wasn't able to come in today, because I like to hear that guy talk. He's a confident young man, and I think he's going to go on to do some pretty great things if he's able to pull it all together and keep it as tight as he is right now, because he's working hard too. He's out at Team Vanderlei, and they got a lot of good small fighters out at Team Vanderlei right now. A lot of guys who are maybe short in stature, but they'll work all day. They'll outwork you for sure. And Donovan is one of those guys that is definitely at the top of the list right now from what I've seen. So hopefully he also is able to get himself a nice contract out of it. He got called in last week. He's coming in on short notice. We'll see how that works. I think at the amateur level, you pretty much know you got to be ready almost all the time. He seems to have the right mindset. He says he doesn't do a huge weight cut. I don't know the exact numbers on his weight cut, but he says it's not too bad. So we'll see if he's able to, put all that aside and just focus on the fight. From what I've seen from him, he shouldn't have too much trouble with that. And again, since Team Vanderlei has so many good smaller weight class fighters, I think he'll be more than prepared for it. He's also got great coaches there, so he should be fine. In Extreme Couture has Justin James, who is going for his 4th win. If he's able to win this weekend in Michigan at TXC, he'll be 4-1, and hopefully he's going to be close to getting a more lucrative pro contract. Yeah, it's one of those things you can never be totally sure when you're going to get your name called, but one of the things Justin has going for him is that he has an extensive amateur career. He has 51 fights total right now, and his amateur record, I believe, I'm going off of memory here, so Justin, I'm sorry if I get this wrong, but 34-14, and I believe one either draw or no contest, or 31-14. Yeah, that should be right. Hopefully I got that right, Justin. Again, I'm sorry if I got that wrong, but 31 wins as an amateur is a pretty absurd number, honestly, that someone hasn't looked at this guy already, other than Extreme Couture, who has him coaching there. He needs to get into a pro show or a high-level pro show pretty quickly. Let's see what he can do. Get him on Tuff or WSOF maybe, or even Bellator. Someone's got to take him. I don't know what Extreme Couture does as far as letting their guys go international, but 1FC's out there. I believe there's still some good shows out in Japan, although I don't know how Shuto and all those, there's politics involved in that stuff. But Justin's got to get somewhere, because that's so many fights. That's Igor Vovchanchyn-esque. I believe when Igor came into Pride, he had something like 50 wins already, or maybe he had like 35 wins. So he's not far off, James. But he's fighting at TXC in Michigan. That's his hometown, or his home state. And hopefully he'll be able to come out on top. He said he had a second fight set up not too long after that. Hopefully he'll be able to find an opponent there. And if he's able to win both of those, he's at 5-1. He's got to at least be on the radar somewhere. And with Ray Sefo working in Extreme Couture, there's a good chance they'll at least give him a look, see what he's got, and hopefully he can get something out of it. But best of luck to Justin. Back at Team Vandalay, we have Tom Cruise, who is also going out to Michigan. He's got to make up for that one loss he had in his first fight. But again, he's one of those lower weight class fighters out at Team Vandalay, and hopefully he'll be able to get that win, be 1-1, and from there he can just start pushing and get his name out there a little more. We're pushing all these guys, by the way, on fightgrind.com, which hopefully you all get a chance to check out, and you can read some of the stories about these local guys and tell your friends about it. Start to give these local guys a name, because they're doing a lot of work. They're all working real hard and making very little, if anything, out of it. Some of them are even losing money just by trying to go to shows and travel around and fight. So to be able to give them a little bit of support and help them out in their cause is always great. So check it out at fightgrind.com, or you can find it on Facebook at facebook.com/fightgrind. A couple other people we have, 2 syndicate fighters are getting ready for shows. Heather Jo Clark is fighting at XFC on the 18th, I believe, and she is 5-4 right now, so this is a big fight for her. This is another pro fight, and if she wins, she's at 6-4, which looks a lot better than 5-5. But she works hard. Yeah, it's tough for these ladies who go into these big gyms, and it's a lot of guys that are training and not a lot of women. And it makes a difference to be able to train with people consistently. And if you get a lot of guys training, it's one of those things where sometimes you can't find people in your weight class when you're female. Luckily, the male weight classes are starting to get down to those lower strata. So we're getting more guys that can spar with women and give them something to work with. But Heather Jo Clark is working pretty hard to make sure she gets to 6-4. I know she had a late opponent change, which is always difficult, and it's got to be frustrating, especially when you're already cutting weight. You've been training for a certain person for, however long it is, however long your camp's been going, and then all of a sudden you got to change everything up because they decided to have a new opponent for you. But it is what it is, and hopefully she'll be able to come out on top and have that 6-4 record. We also have Josh Watson, who also trains at Syndicate, who's fighting at New England Fights, I believe. New England Fighting. It's one of those. And he's fighting on November 9th. He's originally from Massachusetts, I believe, or at least up in the Northeast. So he's going back home. He has a record of 7-3. And we got to hope that he'll be able to bring back a win from all the way over there. You don't want to travel that far and then not have the win out of it. But most of these guys know that the best you can do is just try your hardest, and you got to hope that it turns your way, especially when you leave it up to the judges. I assume all of these fighters are not guys that like to grind it out and hope for a decision, because we've seen it time and time again in almost every combat sport. You leave it to judges, you're asking to just be frustrated. So it is what it is, but that's what you got to do. All right. Next, we're going to talk about the UFC 166 event that's coming up. Obviously, John and I teased this before. Unfortunately, I don't have John here to tell me why I'm wrong about all my predictions and concepts of who's better and who's worse and who will win and who will not. But I'll do my best to try to be fair to all sides in this. And just so everyone knows, what I like to use when I'm keeping track of all my wins and losses using Tapology.com, there you can pick the winners and losers of each fight and pick the round and the way that they lose. It's a fun way to keep track of whether or not you know anything about MMA or not. And I'm certain that after Saturday I will be putting my foot in my mouth, and that'll make for a good show, I suppose. But, I sit around pretty much a good 2 hours per day where I'm looking at old fights and fighters and trying to decide what the best matchups are and who has the best chance of winning. And it's still, it's hard to get above 70% correct predictions. The last show that we did, the UFN show that was in Brazil, I think I got half of them right. And part of that's judging. Part of that's just that sometimes you just don't know. It's one of the beauties of the sport, but it can be endlessly frustrating, especially for someone like me who's putting my voice out there So now when I'm wrong, everyone will make sure that I know that they know. So what are you going to do? But anyway, one of the things I noticed about this card, and maybe it's just because it's the end of the year, maybe it's just because the UFC's been hearing a lot of people complaining about that cards aren't as stacked as they used to be. There's too much thinning out of the talent across too many shows. But this show in particular has kind of that feel of the old shows where there are guys that you could put on a show of their or a card of their own. They could be the top guys or at least the co-main events and fill up the main card, but instead they're being pushed down to the undercard. There's 4 Facebook fights as well. I don't know how many out there actually watch the Facebook fights. I watch them every time, of course. But this time there's 4 of them, which is great. Because who wants to leave Facebook to go do other things, right? So you just put it up, you put the fights right there, and you can still whatever you do on Facebook. So we got 4 fights down there. Those fit as undercards, and they fit as Facebook fights. But the undercard itself that'll be on TV on Fox Sports 1, that card has Soteropoulos versus KJ Noons. It has Sarah Kaufman versus Jessica Ai. It's got Nate Marquardt versus Hector Lombard and Tim Boach versus CB Dalloway. Those are all fights that could easily be on the main card for a Brazil show or a TV show. Honestly, you could even put them on pay-per-views, especially guys like Marquardt and Lombard, but we'll get back to those guys. The first one we got to talk about is Soteropoulos versus KJ Noons. Both of these guys, you got to imagine this is kind of a last chance for them. I'm not even sure who should be more desperate in this situation. As we all know in the UFC, a lot of it has to do with how exciting you can be and how much you bring to the fight. But both of these guys are in some pretty big trouble if they can't get a win out of it. Soteropoulos has fallen off in the last couple of years. He's lost his last 3 bouts. Probably what is more worrisome is that his last 2 losses have been by KO, which is never a good sign because once you have more than, I would say, 3 or 4, people start wondering if you got anything left at all, and it's not your fault. It's just, it's physiology. It's how the body works. And sometimes you just start not being able to take those punches. We've seen it with great fighters like Arlovsky and Chuck Liddell. So we can see it with Soteropoulos too, and KJ knows how to box. So I'm not sure. Well, and it could be I'm reading too much into it. His 2 losses, or 2 of his losses out of the last 3 have been to Dos Anjos and Pearson. Those are both guys that know how to throw hard. So maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but I think everyone at this point who follows the sport knows that once you start getting knocked out, it seems to become a trend. It seems to become easier. So obviously we should all hope that Soteropoulos doesn't end up having, massively violent knockouts a la Chuck Liddell. But it very much could be. Meanwhile, KJ Noons, who has been around for a long time, if you're only a UFC fan and just kind of stuck with the UFC, you might not know KJ Noons that well. He started out in 2002. He's been around for a long time, and he's been a consistently good fighter. I don't know that he's ever reached that elite echelon, but he's always been a consistent fighter. And unfortunately, recently, that consistency has started to fall off. Well, let's put it this way. He's been consistent, but in the wrong direction. He's lost 5 of his last 6. All of them have been by decision. Just like Soteropoulos, though, I think we need to look at who he's been losing to. He lost to Nick Diaz. He lost to George Masvidal. I can never say that guy's name right. Masvidal, who beat the Tuff winner, Chiesa, recently. He lost to Josh Thompson, who is going to be the number 1 lightweight contender in the UFC. He lost to Ryan Couture, which was a controversial decision. Honestly, in that one, I thought it was one of those coin flip, you should call it a draw unless you just want to decide blindly. I don't know, just flip a coin or throw a dart at a board with their pictures on it. That fight was a little ridiculous as far as how do you know who won it. But the judges decided that KJ lost to Ryan Couture. And then the other loss he had was against Donald Cerrone. Those are all names that people who follow MMA and even the UFC should know each of those names. They're all good fighters, and it's not like he's getting, destroyed. He's doing what he can in the fight. maybe his game's a little limited and that causes a little problem. Maybe he's trying to do too much counter punching because he is a boxer first. And so, it's unfortunate some of the time. Other times it's justified. But the bottom line is 5 of his last 6 have been losses. So he's got to figure something out. If I had to pick someone in this fight, I got to think that Soteropoulos is going to be able to find a way because he can utilize kicks more. Now, as I say that, I realize if he's throwing kicks, KJ Noons is not, he's not chump on the ground. So maybe he's going to look for those kicks to get takedowns, and all apparently you need in the UFC half the time is one takedown, and you win the entire round as long as you don't die. So, I don't know, maybe I'm going a little too out on a ledge here, but I gotta say Soteropoulos just has a more well-rounded game. I think that he's had some tough losses against some top guys, and guys who are, right at the echelon of being champions. So, I gotta go with him this time around. But this is one of those ones where next week I could be saying, well, I should have known KJ was going to do this and that, and what was I thinking going with Soteropoulos? That's insane. But yeah, you gotta back someone. You gotta back a horse. I'll back Soteropoulos, unless I come back on Friday and decide I do not back Soteropoulos. For now, we're calling it Soteropoulos. Sarah Kaufman versus Jessica Eye. This is a peculiar fight to me. Eye is good. I've seen her fight before. I don't know why she's matched up with Kaufman this time around. Maybe they just couldn't find someone else. Maybe they want to test Kaufman's stand-up. I feel like Kaufman on the ground is just too good. She's been able to, outside of someone like Rousey, she's one of the best. She's been grinding it for a long time. Jessica Eye is solid, but I haven't seen her take on the type of fighters that would make me feel comfortable she could beat Kaufman. All that said, Kaufman can get tagged. We've seen her get tagged before. She fought Leslie Smith at Invicta and arguably lost that fight. I honestly thought she lost, but the judges gave it to her, likely for a takedown or two that I am not recalling right now. But Kaufman is just a beast, and she's been around a long time. The one thing you can say for Eye is that if she hits Kaufman hard, Kaufman could be in trouble. You never know when that's going to change a fight. Again, it's one of the things we love about this sport. But when you're sitting where I'm sitting, it becomes one of those difficult situations where Kaufman can control the ground the whole time, or Jessica can land a good punch that turns the tide of the entire fight, and then I'm left looking pretty silly. But I gotta go with Kaufman. I think she's going to be able to do well enough in the stand-up and control the ground consistently throughout the fight. The next one we have Marquardt versus Lombard. This is a fight that most people would have, if you said Marquardt versus Lombard 4 years ago, you would assume it would be for a title or for a number one contender spot. I don't know that you would ever assume it would be any lower than the third fight on a card if we're talking 4 years ago. Now, neither of these guys have lived up to the potential that they were billed with. Marquardt has made it to fighting against Anderson Silva for the belt. It was when the division was, I would say, weaker at the time. It's always hard to say when you're looking back that far because you kind of forget who was making their way onto the scene, who was falling off, who was just in a rut. But Marquardt came in when there wasn't a whole lot going on there from what I recall, and he wasn't able to win it out. Dana White has said in the past that Marquardt is a choker and doesn't know how to bring it to the most important fights. Now, that is one of those statements that at first it seems real harsh and it seems unfair, but in a weird way it's kind of a compliment too. Pretty much what Dana's saying is that Marquardt should be able to be a champion or to be one of the top guys in the world without question, but he just has something that's holding him back that's mental. So while Dana is definitely cutting him down and giving him a little harsh truth, at the same time he is saying that Marquardt is good enough to be able to hold a belt or at least be challenging for a belt consistently. Although we've seen with Okami that doesn't the latter doesn't really help out there, at least as far as keeping a job. But still, it's a put down, it's a compliment. It's harsh, but it is true if you look at his fights. He's had trouble beating those guys that gives him another shot at the title. Guys like Talis Litis, Sonnen, Okami, all of them were able to beat Marquardt when he needed to step up to show that he was ready to fight Silva again. So there's some truth to it. He's just an underachiever when it comes to these big fights, and I'm not trying to pretend I know why it is that happens, but I do know that I would agree with what I'm inferring Dana's saying, which is that he could be a champion if he just put everything together and didn't look like a fish out of water sometimes when he's in that number one contender spot. So we'll see what he can do against Lombard, but Lombard is another guy who's an underachiever. For years we saw him, I believe we first saw him, most people became aware of him in the Bushido shows over in Japan. And he looked scary there, and then he continued to look scary over in Bellator once he was able to come over. He was actually slated to be in the UFC a long time ago, but he had trouble with his green card and was unable to participate in the fights. This was before they started having fights in Brazil. So he, a lot like Glover Teixeira, was having trouble being able to pick up fights in the UFC simply because he couldn't get into the country. So unfortunately, that kind of slowed his ability to make it to where he is now. But he went into Bellator. He was able to pretty much dominate everyone they threw in front of him there. Part of that had to do with the guys were just willing to go at him because what did they have to lose other than their teeth and their jaw hinge and things like that. But people were willing to take that chance against Lombard. And as soon as he came to the UFC, and I've got to admit, half of the people that you saw on internet forum boards or people that talk a lot about MMA, half of them would say, I don't think he's going to be able to do much in the UFC. And to the other half of us, it seemed crazy. But, it seems to be the case. He has trouble once he gets to the UFC because people aren't as willing to just run out at him and hope that they can get a hit in before he hits them. Guys in the UFC are more aware of what there is to lose. They're more aware of what they need to do against Lombard, which is to pick your shots, circle away, avoid his, berserker onslaughts that he'll do if you give him an opening. And so the UFC guys have just figured that part out so far. And they've decided all you got to do is circle away, stay away from those takedowns when you can. If you do get taken down, you get back up as quickly as possible because he will hurt you. And you got to remember, this guy's a judo champion. He's a top-level judo guy, and with how explosive and how low his center of gravity is, if he does get a hold of you, you're in trouble. So you do have to constantly be circling away and to be picking your shots as best you can, avoiding his big old hooks, kind of a Vanderlei Silva hook machine. And he does throw that uppercut in there sometimes too, which Vanderlei does not do. But he's going to pretty much blow his load if you are able to keep moving. He's going to keep coming at you. He's going to keep looking for that spot, but he doesn't really evolve if the fight isn't going his way. So we have Lombard and Marquardt both not living up to their hype, both having to know that their backs are somewhat to the wall. Now, if they put on an amazing show, I don't think either of these guys are going anywhere. Maybe getting a pay cut if they lose. Maybe getting cut. I don't know, though. If they put on a real good show, like they can do, if they both come in and won it, then I think both of them will be fine, because they both could easily be champions. They could, honestly, they should be fighting for a title right now, or a number one spot. They are both ridiculously good. But, I'm not sure what either of them's going to be able to do if they don't show that kind of drive and passion like they should have, or like they do have at times when there isn't a lot on the line. If I had to pick, I got to go Lombard again. And I've said it twice now, and I've been sure he's going to go berserker and figure it out, and he hasn't really done it. He was able to beat Paul Harris, who is another confusing human being when it comes to how he fights. But outside of the Paul Harris fight, Lombard just hasn't been able to figure it out. And it's frustrating as someone who's followed him for as long as I have. But it is what it is. And I got to imagine he's going to be able to get a hold of Marquardt. And if he's able to get on top, I don't think that Nate's going to be able to get out from it. We'll see, though. I'm sure that John would disagree with me if he were here. The next fight is Tim Boetsch versus Dalloway, which I'm surprised this is ahead of the Lombard and Marquardt fight, because while Boetsch is a big name and he deserves his spot, Dalloway he's good, he's solid, but he doesn't have much of a name yet. Maybe they're pushing him right now. Maybe this is his chance to step up. But I found it interesting that they were throwing this on to the top of the prelims card. But here it is, so let's talk about it. Boetsch has pretty much been living off of his knockout of Okami. Since then, he has not been able to do much with his opportunities. I don't think it's because he's not a good fighter. Certainly not because he's not tough, because he can take a beating when things aren't going his way. But it just doesn't seem like he has all the tools that he needs to be able to beat the top echelon. So what we might be seeing is that Boetsch is now being used as a sort of gatekeeper, where Okami actually was, to see if Dalloway is ready for that next level, to see if he's able to be put on main cards, to be exciting, because Boetsch is exciting as long as you are willing to fight with him and not just try to win points and constantly circle away and stay away. Boetsch did this pretty much the same thing against Lombard, so he does know how to fight smart, but if you bring it, he'll give it right back. So I see this is a big opportunity for Dalloway to be able to kind of impose who he is as a fighter, because so far he's been kind of back and forth. We're not sure if he's able to take on top level guys, or if he's able to just eke by wins, or if he has to play a safe game in order to do it. Dalloway does have one thing going for him, which we talked about before with Jake Shields, which is an awkward striking style. And while awkward can often be a big problem if you're not talented and tough, if you got a bit of a chin on you and you know how to implement your game plan, no matter how weird it is, it can throw people off. One of the things I said about the Anderson Silva fight when he was about to fight Weidman was that if Weidman wanted to beat him, he had to throw unorthodox strikes, because one of the biggest problems you have when fighting top-level strikers is that if you throw regular punches, they've been training those punches the whole time they've been in the sport. They have seen those punches so many times. They're at an upper echelon. They know it before you're even fully committing to it. So they're able to dodge it easier. They're able to do what they want with you by using counters and feints. So when you have a style that's like Jake Shields or is like CB Dalloway, where it's kind of awkward angles, it almost looks a little funky at times, like you don't know what you're doing, but they're still hitting with that pop and that speed and quickness that you need to be able to tag your opponent, it actually can work in your favor. Now, I don't know how great it's going to work against a guy like Tim Boetsch, who doesn't care how you're throwing punches. He just wants to hurt you. And I'm also not sure what Dalloway's going to have as far as the ground game. We've seen Boetsch has some holes in his ground game. Before that Okami knockout, he was getting tooled on the ground. But he stayed with it. He was able to touch Okami, and once he did, he was able to finish him. That could be a lot like what we see with Dalloway, although Dalloway doesn't have nearly the wrestling skills that Okami does. That said, I don't know how much Boetsch has in takedown defense at all. We've seen it in a couple fights in a row now where he hasn't been able to figure out how to stop the takedown from anyone who has legitimate wrestling. But we'll see. Dalloway likes to do submissions. I doubt that's going to be something you want to try to do against Boetsch. But again, this is probably why this fight is on the card, is because it gives Dalloway a chance to show who he is. And it gives Boetsch a chance to show that he is still relevant in the division. So, I don't know. We'll see. I have a feeling it might be a snoozer. I got Boetsch probably going by decision. Maybe he can get a knockout in there. But I feel like Dalloway's going to make it more of a points fight. Boetsch is going to come on strong and hurt him a couple times. Again, I'm getting way too specific. This is going to be terrible when Dalloway takes him down 30 seconds later, submits him in the first round. I'm going to look like a dummy. But those are the chances you take when you're talking about this stuff. On to the main card. Dotson versus Montague. I have no idea how Montague's going to be able to beat Dotson. Dotson's like a little ninja, and he is, without a doubt, one of the top flyweights in the world. I don't think it's a question. I don't know if anyone's questioning it, but if they are, that's silly. Montague's best win is against a local fighter, actually, Ulysses Gomez, or a local product. I'm not sure if he's from here. I haven't had the pleasure of talking to him yet. But that is Montague's biggest win. That was back in 2011 for the TPF championship. The only other two UFC fighters that he's faced were Ian McCall and Robbie Peralta. Both were not in the UFC. This is his UFC debut. But he lost to Ian McCall and Peralta. Other than that, it's a lot of people that we don't know. Again, it's his debut against Dodson, who is got to be the number one contender if he wins this. He probably already is the number one contender. I don't know that he even had to do a fight to be able to be in that spot after Benavidez. But that's what happens right now in the flyweight division because there isn't a lot of talent yet. They're still cultivating the talent. Honestly, I think on that Tuff show, they need to just do women and flyweights, maybe bantamweights and featherweights, but women and flyweights should just be on every year because those are the interesting people to watch anyway. We all know the heavyweights are just going to knock each other out, and you can just throw them in the UFC right now. People will watch it. So why not? By the way, if you haven't ever listened to Dodson talk, you should probably do so, and you'll hear him do his little laugh. It's an obnoxious little laugh. A lot of people don't like it. But one thing I noticed about it, I listen to a lot of funk music. I don't know if you guys knew that about me, Bootsy, but I listen to a lot of funk music. And his laugh is exactly like the laugh you hear in every single Gap Band song ever. And I will bet dollars to donuts that whoever raised him listened to the Gap Band. And that's at least, I don't know if it's conscious or subconscious, but that's where that laugh is coming from. I can't even listen to the Gap Band anymore. Well, partially because their songs last like 7 minutes and it's the same sentence over and over. But the other reason is because then I just think Dodson, and he's kind of obnoxious with it. I'm not taking anything away from his talent. He's ridiculously good. I'm sure he's a nice guy to hang out with, but that laugh is ridiculous. And it's the Gap Band laugh. And I can't believe his nickname isn't Gap Band, even though that'd be a terrible nickname. He should do it, because I said so. On to heavyweights. I like that we go from flyweights to heavyweights. That's a good idea, because, well, just because it's funny. I want them to pass each other as they're from the ring. I want to see Gabriel Gonzaga walk in and pass Dodson, Sean Jordan pass Montague, or maybe the heavyweights could carry the little guys in on their shoulders and then drop them off in the cage and then just hang out until their fight. I'm okay with that. You know, add a little pizzazz, some of that pride pizzazz that used to happen back in the day. Anyway, I'm getting off topic. Gabriel Gonzaga versus Sean Jordan. Gabriel Gonzaga is kind of like Overeem in the way that he's very good, but he gets dropped. And when he gets dropped, it's pretty much over. He has to control the fight from beginning to end, or he's not going to win the fight. Part of that has to do with being a heavyweight. There's not a lot of back and forth going on in a lot of heavyweight fights because when you get hit with those little gloves and those gigantic fists with a 250-pound plus man behind it, well, I mean, honestly, who's playing rope-a-dope? It's a terrible idea. So when Gonzaga gets hit, he tends not to come back. That said, he's able to lay people out as well. Sean Jordan is a guy we still don't know a lot about if you haven't been following his Strikeforce career. He has 11 KOs in his career. He is able to hurt people. He's a big puncher, and that's probably not great for Gonzaga unless Gonzaga is able to control it from beginning to end. I got Sean Jordan in this one. I got it by TKO. This is the one, by the way. If there's any of them I get just completely wrong, this would probably be it, because heavyweights, I don't even know why. If you bet on heavyweight fights, you're a braver man than I. I honestly, unless Josh Barnett is fighting, and it's just because I love the man, I'm probably not going to bet on a heavyweight fight unless it's a huge mismatch. Even then, it's a terrible idea. We saw what happened to LeVar Johnson in his last Bellator fight. It's just too easy to get knocked out as a big man. So you just stay away from it. So I got to go with Jordan just because he's got 3 rounds to get a good hard punch in. Oh, I forgot to say for the Dodson fight, well, I hope you noticed I'm clearly going for Dodson in that one. So, and maybe I'll bet Montague because the money will be good, but I have to go with Dodson if we're just talking about who I think will win. So, Dodson and Jordan, and then Dodson should be carried away on Jordan's shoulders at the end of the fight. It'll be great. They'll become best friends. It'll be like a Disney movie. We have Melendez versus Sanchez. This is another weird fight to me. Melendez, I know he's coming off a loss, but it was a loss to Benson Henderson. It was a fight that a lot of people thought Melendez actually won. I personally think it's another fight that you should just call a draw, or can the UFC do bonus rounds? Can we have bonus rounds in MMA if you just can't decide? Because 10-point must is terrible for 3 rounds. It sways way too easily. And then if you do have draws allowed or more common, then there's way too many draws and everything gets bottlenecked because there's too many people who have a claim to the title. So honestly, we should just throw in an extra round. Melendez versus Henderson could have easily gone another round or two just to make sure we knew who won. But Sanchez fought Takanori Gomi last, and I'm pretty sure he lost outright in most people's minds. For whatever reasons, the refs or the judges gave him the win. That's their prerogative, and I don't think we should penalize him for what the judges say. So he's moving up in the ranks, and that's fine. He's now taking on Melendez, but this fight looks weird to me because it seems like an easy win for Melendez. At least if Melendez comes in with all the same tools he's always had and the same fire and the same cardio, I don't see Sanchez being able to keep up with him. Sanchez has taken a lot more damage in his career. He shows a lot more holes in his game. And I just don't know that he'll be able to stop Melendez's constant pressure. Usually it's Sanchez putting on the pressure. We saw in that Gomi fight that Sanchez was backing up more often. That's not a great plan for him, although he may have no other choice against Melendez. And Melendez has beaten guys like Josh Thompson, like Shinya Aoki and Tatsuya Kawajiri from the Japan shows. I believe he fought both of them in Strikeforce, though. But he beats people who seem unbeatable, and Sanchez doesn't even seem unbeatable. So I have to have Melendez probably by decision, because Sanchez, for as many holes as he has in his game, is still no joke. He can definitely lay it on you, and if he can turn the match his way. Also, he's crazy, by the way, and I don't mean that in hyperbole. Like, I'm pretty sure that he's diagnosable for something. I don't know what, because I'm not a doctor or a psychiatrist, but he's pretty out there. And honestly, if you haven't seen one of his walk-ins, watch his walk-ins. They're almost always funny. The thing is, I don't know that he means for them to be funny. But they are. Unless you feel worried for his mental well-being. But that may play into his favor that he doesn't know that Melendez should be able to beat him easily. You know, you go into it, you feel like you can win, and maybe you can. The last one that we have to talk about is Cormier versus Nelson. It's another heavyweight fight, so I'm going to sound stupid no matter what I think. Plus, I'll probably change my mind on all these by Friday. I'll look at some video, I'll think I see something, which I don't, but I'll tell myself I do, and then I'll just change everything. But anyway, Cormier, Nelson, I gotta have Cormier, although I've been watching Nelson train out here in Vegas. I've been watching what he's doing, and the guy is ridiculously good. The guy could also probably be a middleweight if he wanted to cut weight. He's got the frame where he could probably be at least a light heavyweight. If he worked really hard, he could probably be a middleweight. Because I see him around King Mo, and King Mo fights, I believe, at 185. And maybe fights at 205, and I'm just making that up. But Roy Nelson, point being, Roy Nelson is not much bigger than King Mo. And King Mo is a guy who cuts weight. He knows how to do it. He's got a system. But when I watch Nelson train, man, that guy puts in the work. I remember Dana White saying that he felt Nelson did not take things seriously, didn't take the sport seriously. Clearly, Dana White was talking about just that you need to act like it's your job when you're doing the press and you're doing the answering of questions and you're kowtowing to whoever is managing and promoting, all that stuff. That had to be what Dana White's talking about, because if you watch Roy Nelson train, I guarantee you won't think that he's taking it lightly or isn't putting in all of his effort. That guy he works hard. He's a workhorse, and I don't think he's getting enough credit for everything he does. And maybe it's just because he's a little different than most fighters. He seems like a shyer guy. He's a more soft-spoken guy. He does make jokes when he's asked things during press conferences. And I think that's just because he's a generally nice guy. So I don't know what he's going to be able to do with Cormier. I think Cormier's clearly going to have the advantage in points because he's going to be able to take Nelson down. One thing I've been wondering is how Nelson's going to deal with, do you even worry about training to stop the takedowns? Because Cormier is an Olympic wrestler. Are you even at all concerned about trying to stop those? Roy Nelson's no slouch on the ground. Everybody forgets that. And it has been a while since he's been, running around doing Abu Dhabi tournaments and whatnot. But still, he knows what he's doing on the ground. He started out as more of a ground fighter than a stand-up guy, and he just happens to have freakish power in those hands, which he works on too. But there's just some natural power that you can't account for in most guys. So, do you even worry about the ground? Do you worry about trying to stop the takedown, or you just let him take you down and try to get up as fast as you can? Honestly, once he's on top of you, though, what are you going to do? You got an Olympic wrestler on top of you. For some reason, I don't think Nelson's going to be too worried about it. I feel like Nelson's a confident guy. He seems like he knows what he's doing most of the time. And it's not like Cormier is going to be able to ground and pound him, because we've seen Nelson take so many punches, and it just seems to have no real effect on it. I'm sure it hurts his face, and I'm sure it can take a little out of him as far as the cardio-wise, but the guy just keeps coming, and he keeps trying, and he keeps throwing those hands, and I've seen him work his hands. He's got some quality hands, and that's something I don't know if we've seen Cormier have to deal with, as someone who isn't afraid of his wrestling, or just isn't afraid of him in general, and then is able to throw hands. Mir probably wasn't afraid of Cormier. I don't think Frank Mir is afraid of people, but he doesn't have the hands that Nelson seems to have. He certainly doesn't have the power. So it kills me, but I probably, if I'm betting on it, I have to go Cormier. But just because, I got to be a homer. I got to be for the guy who's training and I see training. And so I got to go to Nelson. I'm just going to give it to Nelson. I feel like those hands are going to work out. The only problem Nelson's going to have is if he just can't get up, if Cormier takes him down. And maybe he'll find a way. Maybe he's working, it's secret, and he's working extensively on the ground. I just haven't seen it. And granted, I'm not following Nelson around. I don't see him every day. So I just happen to see him work his hands. Those look great. But if I was a person about to fight Cormier, I would probably just be working wrestling every single day, all the time. But see, I'm paranoid. I don't think Roy Nelson is afflicted with that problem. As far as the main event, we talk about it. We've talked about it on the show. I think everyone has seen a million times the commercials and the hype video. I don't watch those hype videos. I like to watch old tape and old videos on guys. I don't like to watch the hype because it always sways. It works where I'm watching a guy and then he, I know Junior Dos Santos helps kids in his poor neighborhood. That's going to make me want to fight for him. It's exactly like what happened with the Nelson thing, where I feel like Cormier is just going to be able to grind it out on the ground, whether or not he actually does anything to Nelson. So I think Cormier will get the nod. But then I see Nelson, I talk to him, he's a nice guy. Well, talk to him. I said hi, and I said, good luck on your fight, while his back was turned because I wasn't paying attention because I was too starstruck and nervous. So I turned away and then turned back and said, good luck on your fight, and he was already looking the other direction. It was an awkward situation. I create awkward situations with my fandom. But anyway, since I'm getting way off topic. Since I know of Nelson, I then am easily swayed to say I will pick Nelson, even if it's against my betting interest. That's how I will feel if I watch the hype videos, because I think that JDS will not be able to stop Kane from taking him down, at least not be able to stop him enough times to get the win. But as soon as I watch a video on him helping children and being a nice guy and doing nice things for people and just talking about how hard he wants it and how much he wants his legacy to work out, then I'll get swayed. I know I will. It's going to happen because he's a likable guy. So I just have to stay away from that. I have Kane winning that one. I don't think he'll stop him because he couldn't stop him last time, and it's not like he wasn't trying. So, pretty sure we got another Kane by decision. But like I was saying last week, you got to wonder why JDS is a 2-1 underdog when he can just throw that one punch and hit you and you're done. Because that punch is not even human. It's a totally different animal. So, we'll see how it goes. And again, I'm sure on Friday I'll change my mind on all this stuff. By the way, I wanted to say a thank you to the Mayweather gym. I went out there today. It was my first time out there. I'll be going out there a lot more because I want to be able to cover boxing as much as I want to cover MMA. There's a lot of boxing going on out here. A lot of those guys deserve more notice. And so at fightgrind.com, we want to be able to help them out. I want to thank the Las Vegas Tribune and Las Vegas Tribune Radio for letting me do the show here today. And we'll be back on Friday to talk more about all things fighting, and hopefully we'll have a Donovan Freelo in here from Team Vandalay to talk about his fight on Saturday, which will be happening at the Palms here, and he can tell me why all of my predictions and ideas are wrong, because someone's got to do it. Otherwise, I'll just run around saying whatever I want and thinking I know what I'm talking about. I need someone to make me second guess things. So, anyway, we will see you on Friday at the same time. Thanks for joining us. Talk to you soon.
There's a song from that